A new beginning, return with high hopes. 20 years had passed since Olivia Carter set foot in her childhood hometown of Willow Springs, Texas. Since her ambitious move to New York City, she'd built a life that, on paper, was the envy of anyone who ever dared to dream big. A dazzling Manhattan apartment, a reputation as a creative visionary in the fiercely competitive world of fashion, and just enough distance from the shadows of her past. Still, when the invitation for the Willow Springs High School class of 2005 reunion arrived in her mailbox, thick cream cardstock, elegant gold script, Olivia felt the thrum of long-forgotten nerves somewhere deep in her chest. She hesitated at first, thumbing the invitation between her fingers. Late one evening, in her high-rise kitchen, memories tumbled back with astonishing clarity. The endless Texas summers, the Friday night lights, the faces of friends and rivals, all tangled together in bittersweet nostalgia. There was an undeniable pull, almost like fate was nudging her to finally confront the things she'd left unresolved. Yet Willow Springs was more than a collection of familiar streets and friendly faces. For Olivia, it was the site of old scars, the place where careless words and betrayals had carved deep wounds. A town where memories of being mocked in the hallway still echoed louder than the praise she'd earned on the runways of New York. In all her years of building a new self, she'd carried that ache in silence, afraid to admit just how much it still hurt. But something had changed. Years of navigating boardrooms and runways in one of the toughest cities in the world had given her an unshakable core. She wasn't the timid girl who had once shrunk away when others shined. Now, she was returning, not as a victim, but as a woman who had transformed pain into power. And she was determined to prove to herself that the past no longer had control over her. Booking her ticket, Olivia felt a flicker of excitement, almost pride, at the thought of walking those familiar streets again. She pictured the old high school auditorium, its bricks sun-bleached and sturdy, and wondered if the people who once defined her greatest humiliation would even recognize the woman she'd become. Whatever happened, Olivia was resolved. She would own her history, embrace everything that made her who she was, and show the world and herself that she was unbreakable, no matter where she stood. The past comes, flooding back at the drive from the airport to Willow Springs, felt like entering a living time capsule. As Olivia's rental car cruised down the familiar highways, lined with golden fields and scattered oak trees, distant memories crept from the dark corners of her mind and settled in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. It was as if every landmark, every weathered barn, every sun-bleached sign whispered reminders of the girl she once was and the lives that had intersected with hers. She found herself slowing at the intersection by Maribel's Diner, where she and her high school friends used to cram into a booth after games, nursing sodas and trading inside jokes. The building hardly looked changed, save for a new awning over the window and a fresh coat of paint that struggled to hide decades of laughter. Olivia's chest tightened. She could almost hear their voices, so young, so certain that the world would bend to their will. The closer she got to town, the sharper the recollections. On Main Street, the drugstore still had the metal benches under the neon sign, where she once sat waiting, sometimes hoping for a ride, sometimes just hoping to blend in. She remembered the annual Willow Springs parade, with its float of homecoming queens and the unspoken social hierarchy that dictated who belonged where. Riley's barbershop, the movie house showing retro films on weekends, the lingering smell of July BBQs drifting from behind the baseball diamond, all of it pressed in around her, vivid and aching. But as she rolled past Willow Springs High School, everything narrowed to one unavoidable memory. Grace Turner. Grace, with her unshakable poise and trademark dazzling smile, the girl everyone wanted to impress, and the one Olivia had tried, time and again, to befriend. Their story was complicated. There were years where Grace's approval meant everything, where a shared secret or whispered promise could make Olivia feel seen. But there was also hurt. The biting remarks delivered with sweet charity, the way Grace rallied others behind silken accusations, and the day she'd turned Kyle Anderson, Olivia's first love, against her with casual cruelty. The memories flooded back in colors, both bright and bruised. It wasn't just the heartbreak of a teenage romance lost. It was the sting of betrayal from someone she once called a friend. Olivia remembered every lowering glance in the hallways, every rumor that took on a life of its own, every invitation that never came. Years later, it was clear that Grace's shadow had stretched far beyond graduation, shaping so much of Olivia's drive to escape, achieve, improve herself elsewhere. Now, as she drove through her old neighborhood, and the houses gave way to the center of town, Olivia felt both longing and trepidation. She wondered, as the roads twisted toward her childhood home, what it would be like to see Grace again, to face the echoes of old wounds with the woman she was now. One thing was certain: the ghosts of Willow Springs would not be easily ignored, and this time, Olivia was determined not to run from them. The fateful reunion. The night buzzed with a nervous electricity that Olivia hadn't felt in decades. She stood for a few minutes outside the old Willow Springs High School auditorium, clutching her invitation and replaying the strange script of her return. Even from the parking lot, she could hear the familiar blend of laughter and country music drifting through. The heavy glass doors, a soundtrack that punctuated so many adolescent milestones, now looping into her adulthood with disorienting clarity. She took a steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and walked in. The transformation inside was remarkable. Banners with "Welcome Home, Class of 2005" fluttered beneath long rows of cheerful string lights, and the scent of barbecue mingled with perfume and aftershave. Round tables dotted the room, each covered in crisp white linen and ringed by the faces, some softened by time, others barely changed, that had populated Olivia's teenage years. Conversations ebbed and flowed, laughter crescendoed in pockets. Old friends clasped hands and exchanged stories that grew taller with each glass of wine. The sight, at once foreign and familiar, made Olivia's heart twist with a surge of nostalgia and an undercurrent of dread. A cluster of women broke into applause near the buffet table, and at the center stood Grace Turner, unmistakable even from halfway across the room. She was surrounded by admirers, her blonde hair shining under the fairy lights, her laugh carrying just the right note of warmth and superiority. Dressed in a tailored cream suit and glossy pumps, Grace looked every bit the successful businesswoman the small town celebrated, owner of an ever-growing nail salon empire and poster child for ambition rewarded. Olivia felt a chill despite the warmth of the Texas night. This was the moment she had rehearsed in her mind, the encounter she couldn't avoid and, in some restless corner of her heart, almost craved. She moved toward the registration table, head held high, offering a polite smile to the organizers who asked for her name. In whispers, she pretended not to notice. A few heads turned. Someone gasped. A few more squealed. "Livy!" The whispers became a wave as Olivia was pulled into a tidal pool of hugs, questions, and raised eyebrows, Stories and rumors about the girl who made it in New York were everywhere, it seemed, and her mere presence confirmed and contradicted them all at once. She had barely set down her clutch before an old friend, Amanda, always the peacemaker, gleefully grabbed her arm and dragged her through the sea of bodies toward Grace, who caught Olivia's eye with a practiced smile. If there was surprise in Grace's gaze, it never broke the effortless facade. She practically glided over, arms outstretched. "Olivia Carter," she purred, her Texan drawl honeyed and precise. "Well, look at you. I was just telling everyone I hoped you'd show. Willow Springs just hasn't been the same without its resident dreamer." The words were meant as a compliment, but landed like a warning, a gentle tap to remind Olivia of her place in the old pecking order. Still, Olivia's armor held. She matched Grace's smile, beat for beat, feeling the shimmering wall of performance between them, as if they were the only two people in a room designed to watch their every move. "Willow Springs is still the best place to learn how to dream big, I suppose," Olivia replied, her tone light, her gaze unblinking. For a heartbeat, the air shimmered. Around them, conversations continued. But Olivia knew the subtle shift in body language, guests leaning in, eyes flickering between the two women, hungry for the drama that floated above the appetizers. Grace's admirers filled in the gaps, lavishing her with questions about her business, her recent TV segment, how her sales outpaced rival salons in Dallas and Houston. Grace accepted the praise gracefully, but every so often, her focus slid back to Olivia, and her questions grew sharper. "So, are you married? Did you ever keep in touch with Kyle?
Just tell me what you want.
What's it like,
and I'll make sure it
really,
happens."
living among the sharks in Manhattan?" Olivia answered simply. She played her cards close, neither boasting nor self-deprecating, but her very presence, confident, poised, stylish, began to draw attention, admiration, and just a hint of envy. The tension was velvet-gloved, but unmistakable. Over the next hour, Olivia circulated the room, reconnecting with classmates who remembered her struggles, her awkwardness, or sometimes nothing at all. She listened to stories of marriages that didn't last, of businesses dreamed and lost, of parents grown ill and siblings moved away. Each story softened the divide between winner and loser, and Olivia found herself feeling a kinship with these familiar strangers. Not everyone stayed in Willow Springs because they had no place else to go. Many stayed because it was home, and home was worth fighting for. Eventually, the program shifted. Yearbook slides projected on a big screen, a Guess That Teacher trivia game, and a growing crowd on the dance floor as old hits blared from the speakers. Grace, ever the queen bee, made sure to remain visible. When she took the microphone for the official welcome speech, she drew the crowd in with practiced ease, peppering her stories with local jokes and heartfelt reminders of their shared youth. Then, as if on cue, Grace invited Olivia up. "You know, y'all, not everyone here tonight gets to say they've taken Manhattan by storm," she drawled with a dazzling smile. "Let's get Olivia Carter up here. Tell us how a Willow Springs girl shook up the Big Apple." The challenge was woven into the applause. Olivia recognized it for what it was, an invitation to shine, but also an audition for a crowd that remembered every stumble. She didn't hesitate. The words came, steady and true. She spoke of Texas roots and city hustle, of chasing dreams and bouncing back when the world said no. Her story focused not on glory, but on lessons learned, courage, kindness, resilience in the face of adversity. There was no trace of bitterness, only a firm gentleness, like a thread of steel wrapped in velvet. The room, surprisingly, settled into stillness, each person caught in the gravity of her experience. For a brief moment, Olivia caught Grace's eye. Beneath the applause, Olivia saw the old calculation, and just for a second, something like doubt. As the evening wore on, the invisible boundary between Olivia and Grace became the silent axis around which the revival spun. Old friends gravitated to Olivia, drawn by her authenticity and gentle strength, while Grace began to find herself on the outside of conversations she once ruled. Olivia smiled, let kindness light her words, even as she recognized the subtle shift of power. By the end of the night, Olivia had not only faced her past, but reclaimed it. She wasn't that timid, easily wounded girl anymore. Nor was she swayed by the opinions of those who once defined her. If this was a contest, she had won, not with cruelty, but with confidence and grace. And everyone in the room felt the difference. And as she stepped out into the autumn Texas night, the chill felt invigorating, the music echoing behind her, the burden of old wounds already beginning to lift. Unhealed scars. Stepping outside the auditorium for a breath of cool night air, Olivia felt a strange mixture of triumph and unresolved ache settle in her chest. Inside, the reunion continued, laughter and music echoing against the brick walls, fragments of the past she had so carefully reconstructed. She leaned against a rail under the yellowing street lamp, the Texas autumn breeze threading through her sleek hair, and let her defenses drop just enough to feel the old pain again. It was supposed to be over, wasn't it? Olivia had envisioned this homecoming for years, sometimes with a sense of battle readiness, sometimes with vulnerable hope. She'd always promised herself that if given the chance, she would face those old ghosts and banish them with her newfound strength. And yet, now that she had stood in the same room as Grace Turner in the crowd that once watched her stumble, why did the ache inside her feel just as sharp and unhealed? The faces of her classmates blurred past her memory like a parade of shadows, but certain moments shimmered in harsh clarity. She remembered being 15 and standing in this very spot. Except then, it was a gathering after the homecoming dance. Olivia had spent days saving up for a second-hand dress, only to have Grace and her clique snicker as she passed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words, half jokey, but meant to sting, still lingered at the edge of Olivia's memory. Look, Cinderella forgot her fairy godmother. She'd laughed it off. What else could a girl do? But the humiliation had burned hot under her skin for weeks. It wasn't just the bullying, or even Grace's pointed betrayals with Kyle Anderson. It was the constant message that Olivia hadn't belonged. Not really. Willow Springs, for all its warmth and small-town charm, had a social order you broke at your own risk. Grace and her circle, with their perfect teeth and polished hair, lorded over the halls with the kind of power only high school royalty can wield. It was always Olivia who was too much, too ambitious, too outspoken, too different. The times she tried to shrink herself to fit in were, in many ways, the wounds that had never really closed. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her palms to the cool metal of the railing. She realized that some scars don't simply vanish with time or distance. No matter how many accolades you collect, or how many city skylines you conquer, some pain becomes woven into the fabric of your identity, humming quietly beneath the other layers. Achievement, sophistication, unwavering confidence. Underneath, she was still that girl who had once wanted so desperately to be accepted. Her phone buzzed with a string of new messages. Friends from the reunion, Old flames testing old sparks, even a few apologies from classmates who had, in the social tidal wave of adolescence, joined in the jeers or simply looked away. Olivia read each message slowly, feeling a complicated swirl of gratitude and sadness. Some wounds, she realized, weren't just about what Grace had done. They were about everyone who had acted as if nothing was wrong, who'd allowed the cruelty to go on, unchallenged. Inside, the music swelled, a classic pop anthem from their high school years. Olivia glanced through the window and saw Grace spinning among a circle of laughing women, her laughter just a touch too loud, her gaze sweeping the room to see who was watching. Olivia felt a flicker of pity for the girl Grace had been, desperate to occupy the center, to direct all energy in the room toward herself, no matter the collateral damage. Olivia almost missed the approach of Amanda, her old friend with the careful smile. Amanda nudged her gently, offering a cup of sweet tea. "You okay?" she asked, tone soft but knowing. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. I thought it would feel different, like there'd be closure after all this time. Why do the old hurts still sting, Amanda? Amanda sipped her tea, considering. Because Grace never really owned up to what she did, and maybe the rest of us didn't either. But most of all, Liv, because you're human. You survived, you thrived. But survival doesn't erase the things you went through. There was comfort in that honesty. For the first time all night, Olivia let herself really feel the scar tissue under the surface. Not just the anger at Grace, but at herself, forever believing the bullies were right. She wondered if she also owed something to that younger self, a promise to never again let someone else tell her what she was worth. Their conversation drifted, and soon Amanda was called back inside. Olivia lingered, replaying scenes in her head, trying to untangle the old narratives. She realized that what hurt most wasn't just Grace's actions, or losing Kyle, or the laughter in the hallway. It was the slow, daily stealing away of her confidence, the way those moments had taught her to expect betrayal and skepticism as a part of love and friendship. Maybe that lesson had served her in Manhattan, where guardedness was survival. But wasn't this also the time to finally put it down? The auditorium door opened, and for a moment, Grace herself stood framed in the golden light, searching for something, or someone. Their eyes met, and Olivia saw a flicker, fear, recognition, vulnerability, before Grace turned away and disappeared into the night's swirl of shadows. For a long while, Olivia stood alone under the stars, feeling the cold and her own pulse. She realized what her next step must be: address her pain, not run from it or hide it behind success. There would be no neat closure, but perhaps a kind of hard-won peace. Tomorrow, Olivia knew, it would be time to take back the narrative, not by seeking revenge, but by telling the truth, owning her place in her own story, and letting the past shine for what it was, unvarnished and real. Only then did she finally exhale, squaring her shoulders for the new confrontation to come, not with Grace, but with the last remnants of fear inside herself. The road ahead would be uncomfortable, even raw, but Olivia was no longer the girl who ran. She would carry her scars and show the world, as well as herself, that they were a testament to survival, not defeat. The grand entrance plan.
Everyone.
The cold clarity of the night on the school steps had given Olivia a new sense of purpose. She stood there for a long while, carefully dissecting the tangled feelings that had risen after seeing Grace and so many old faces. Beneath the ache and the shivering vulnerability was a kernel of something stronger. She realized that true justice, for the wounds of her past couldn't be found in a shouting match or a public humiliation. It would be found in showing everyone, including herself, how far she'd come. That was the real power, to let her presence and her story shine in a way no one could deny. Inside her hotel room that night, Olivia assembled her plan. She sat before the mirror, her tablet and notepad open, and reflected on the woman who'd stared down New York's toughest designers, out-negotiated cunning business partners, and survived heartbreaks, both glamorous and devastating. The next evening's gala at the Willow Springs Country Club, she decided, would not just be a social event. It would be her stage, a place to reclaim her narrative. She didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. What she wanted was something more transformative, to change the balance of power, not by dragging anyone down, but by rising above the pettiness and insecurity that had tried to crush her. Olivia mapped out the details with the precision of someone used to orchestrating runway debuts and executive launches. First came the details of her appearance. Not vanity, but strategy. Standing in front of the closet, she ran her hand over the fabrics she had chosen to bring. She'd packed with this in mind. For the gala, she selected a midnight blue sheath dress, simple but cut to perfection, designed by a fellow Texan who had made it big in the industry. She paired it with subtle gold jewelry, a nod to both her roots and her success. Not too much, but just enough. Her hair she would wear loose in soft waves, stylish but not intimidating. The effect she hoped for was quiet power, elegance that didn't beg for attention, but couldn't be ignored. Next, Olivia rehearsed her message. She envisioned herself giving the brief address she'd been asked to deliver, nominally about chasing dreams. Instead of rattling off her accolades, she'd share a story about resilience. She thought about the times she'd been ignored or belittled, not just by Grace, but by the invisible rules of her hometown. She wanted to show, without naming names, how pain could be turned into ambition, how even the loneliest kid in the room could make something beautiful out of their scars. Olivia wrote and rewrote her speech with the discipline of an orator and the soul of a poet. The next day, she moved through her old world with a new confidence. At breakfast in Maribel's diner, she greeted the waitresses who'd watched her grow up, answering curious questions with good-natured honesty. She let nostalgia soften her edges, determined not to be the ice queen New York had sometimes shaped her to be. By the time evening rolled around, Olivia's nerves hummed with anticipation, but her resolve was steady. Arriving just as the sun set over the manicured lawns, she paused at the club's entrance. The lights inside gleamed, laughter spilled out onto the wide porch, and she could already see Grace holding court at a table near the dance floor. With a final exhale, she glided into the room, every step a quiet declaration. The transformation was immediate. Heads turned, conversations paused, and for a few seconds, Olivia felt all the gazes converging, surprise, admiration, curiosity swirling together in the air. She walked with purpose, smiling just enough to acknowledge familiar faces, but not lingering long on anyone. Her poise was effortless, but measured. She was neither aloof nor desperate to please. She was simply herself, fully and unashamed. Eventually, Amanda intercepted her near the punch bowl. "Girl, you are radiant tonight," Amanda whispered, squeezing Olivia's hand. "People are already talking." Olivia squeezed back, grateful for the lifeline of old, uncomplicated friendship. "Thanks. Tonight isn't about them, though. It's about finally feeling like I belong, because I say so." Before long, the night's formal program began. The club manager introduced her with a few lighthearted anecdotes about Olivia's high school days. And then, the mic was hers. Olivia ascended the stage, the subtle gold of her bracelet catching the chandelier's light. She paused to let silence settle, looking straight at her old classmates. Not as the girl desperate to be liked, but as a woman who needed nobody's permission. She began, "Thank you all for the warm welcome back. Coming home is a strange thing. It brings back all kinds of memories, good and bad. But I realize now, the hardest parts, the moments you never think you'll escape, are sometimes the very things that set you free." She spoke about her first portfolio back in the dusty art room, laughed softly about her awkwardness, even paid homage to the teachers who had believed in her. Then she pivoted, growing more reflective. It's easy to smile and reminisce, but some memories leave deeper marks. I've spent a long time thinking about all the times I felt out of place here, or anywhere. What I want to say tonight is, you don't have to be chosen by the crowd to be worthy. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is not to fit in, but to rise above. There was no accusation, just invitation. In that moment, as Olivia's voice rang through the ballroom, she saw Grace shift in her chair, her mask slipping for a heartbeat, before she resumed her studied smile. Olivia caught her gaze and held it, not out of challenge, but with a kind of gentle pity. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here for all the people who had ever felt small in the presence of someone bigger. Applause grew, at first polite, then ringing as her message sank in. Afterward, Olivia stepped off the stage into a cloud of old faces, some offering congratulations, others seeking a fragment of forgiveness for crimes they may not have realized they committed. Conversations blossomed. Women who remembered awkward slights asked for advice about starting over. Old rivals, now graying, less certain, offered tentative olive branches and tales of their own failures and triumphs. It was the most honest reunion she could have hoped for. Olivia spent the rest of the evening dancing, laughing, and letting herself be seen. She was done hiding. Grace hovered on the periphery, her charm a little less dazzling now, outshined by the truth of Olivia's quiet strength. There was satisfaction, yes, but also unexpected understanding. The roles of prey and predator had vanished. They were all just people, flawed and human, searching for connection despite the walls they built. As the night ebbed away and stars pressed against the Texas darkness, Olivia slipped outside onto the balcony, her heart full, a little sore, a little proud. She knew she had made her statement, not in anger, but in power. She had rewritten the ending, and this time it belonged to her. The truth revealed. That night, after Olivia's transformative speech and the soft buzz of applause, the air at the Willow Springs Country Club shimmered with a peculiar anticipation. Olivia floated from one cluster of classmates to another, conscious of how the conversation kept circling back, not just to her, but to long-forgotten events, unresolved hurts, and silent questions that had lingered between them for years. She felt both present and detached, as if watching the evening unfold from high above. The gentle glow of the chandeliers shimmered on people's faces as they shared stories, some colored by nostalgia, others edged with regret or longing. In every group, beneath the polite laughter and stilted jokes, Olivia sensed something shifting. She was no longer just the returning success story. Her authenticity, the absence of bitterness in her words, and her willingness to name the pain had started a quiet ripple. As the evening wore on, groups that once felt solid began to drift apart and recombine. Old alliances wavered. People who had orbited around Grace for years found their attention subtly redirected, not in overt defiance, but through genuine curiosity for Olivia's journey and a hunger for honesty. Olivia made no move to expose anyone or demand confessions. Instead, she listened, asked real questions, and responded with vulnerability, a radical act in a room trained on small-town politeness. It started innocuously. Around the punch table, Amanda recounted a senior year memory, and someone else interjected, "I always wondered why you and Olivia drifted apart back then." The question, said without malice, hung in the air a little too long. Grace, standing nearby, glanced up from her cocktail, her smile momentarily faltering. It was the first fracture in her seamless facade. Olivia held herself steady and replied, "Sometimes rumors and misunderstandings can turn friends into strangers. I guess we were all just trying to survive high school in our own ways." Her voice, calm and direct, offered no accusation, but didn't shield the discomfort either. After that, more memories surfaced, as if the floodgates had opened. Joshua, who had been part of Grace's entourage, remembered. "There were times we made jokes that went too far, Olivia. I can see now how it must have felt. I'm sorry we weren't better friends." His admission caught others by surprise, and a hush fell over the group. Grace's face reddened. For the first time, her authority wavered. Still, she deflected, summoning a brittle laugh. "Oh, high school. Weren't we all just dramatic kids back then?" Her attempt at lightness landed awkwardly, and several people simply didn't laugh along. A little while later, someone, an old math club friend, brought up homecoming, reminiscing about Olivia's thrifted dress and how beautiful she'd looked. "I always wondered who started that Cinderella rumor," the friend mused, half to herself. Amanda, usually diplomatic, turned to Grace with unexpected boldness. "Grace, you told us that story, didn't you? About Olivia's dress?" Her voice was gentle but unflinching. Grace tried to smile. "I may have said something, but I didn't mean to be cruel." She looked at Olivia, searching for support, but received only calm silence. For Olivia, the moment was both vindication and hurt. She glanced around at the faces, a mix of embarrassment, concern, and for some, relief. Nobody wanted a scene, and neither did she. But neither could anyone pretend nothing had happened. With a composure she hadn't felt as a teenager, Olivia said, "We were all kids, but words can stick. I carried those stories with me for a long time. Sometimes I wonder how differently things might have turned out if we just owned up to what we did or said." This candor cracked open something deeper in the room. Others chimed in, confessions, apologies, remembrances of other classmates who had faded away after similar experiences. The tight clique Grace had relied on for validation began, for the first time, to vocalize their discomfort with the old hierarchy. No voices were raised. The reckoning arrived, not with a bang, but through pointed honesty, in the slow unraveling of shared history. Grace's veneer began to crumble. She tried to recover, moving fluidly among tables, offering compliments and gossip to reclaim her audience. But the center of gravity had shifted. Now, people responded out of politeness, not devotion. Her once adoring circle was thinner, their laughter tinged with uncertainty. She retreated to the bar, her charm faltering when she realized that at last she no longer controlled the narrative. A pivotal moment came when Kyle Anderson, the boy at the heart of one of Olivia's most painful high school betrayals, walked up to her. He looked older, gentler, the cockiness of youth replaced by a humility that surprised her. "Olivia, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I let myself get swayed by things that weren't true. I should have stood by you." Olivia studied his face. she felt the warmth of forgiveness blooming. Thank you, Kyle. We were all just kids, like Grace said. But it means something to hear you say that now. When Grace approached Olivia near the end of the evening, her expression was raw, stripped of the practiced swagger, the perfect hair out of place. I didn't think it would end like this, she whispered. I was just so afraid of being invisible. Olivia looked at her for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the anxious, lonely girl behind the manipulator. We all were, Olivia said, but we make others invisible when we're afraid of it ourselves. You don't have to do that anymore. The acknowledgement hung between them, not as a truce, but as a reckoning. By midnight, the reunion room felt lighter. Laughter was softer, but more real. People said their goodbyes with new sincerity, promising to stay in touch without the bitter aftertaste of old rivalries. Amanda hugged Olivia long and hard, whispering, "You did what none of us could. You made the truth welcome." When Olivia finally left, she wandered the empty parking lot, stars glittering overhead. She felt battered, but free. The truth had not destroyed anyone, but it had set her, and perhaps the others, on the path to something honest. Grace, left without her armor, would have to rebuild herself on real ground. The scars of gossip and betrayal lingered, but Olivia now saw them as reminders of her strength, not her shame. More than vindication, Olivia found release. She'd entered Willow Springs seeking closure, but discovered something more lasting. She could be both wounded and whole. The truth, once feared, now felt like an old friend. And when she looked back at the glowing windows of the country club, Olivia knew her journey from New York to Texas had brought her home, not just to a place, but to herself. Final chapter. Freedom and forgiveness. The last notes of the reunion faded into the cool Texas night, replaced by the hush of gentle breezes and distant crickets. Olivia lingered on the veranda of the country club, her arms wrapped loosely around herself as she gazed out at the parking lot, now nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars and the glowing arc of streetlights. A sense of stillness settled around her, unlike anything she'd felt in years. In that quiet, Olivia drew a long breath, finally aware that she was free. But freedom, she realized, had not come in a flash of triumph or the thunderclap of confrontation. Instead, it arrived quietly, tenderly, in the slow unspooling of old resentments. Like a knot inside her chest, she had finally, after so many years, learned to untangle. For Olivia, freedom was not simply leaving Willow Springs again. It was leaving behind the burden of needing validation, the secret wounds given power by her own silence, the anger at those who had once made her feel small. She thought of the truth-telling that had unfolded inside, the small apologies, the confessions, the unraveling of Grace Turner's carefully spun authority. Olivia's triumph hadn't been loud or vengeful, and that made the victory feel all the more profound. She hadn't come back to humiliate her old rival. She had come to reclaim the narrative, and in doing so, had modeled a kind of courage that inspired others, even Grace, to examine themselves in the glow of real honesty. The magnitude of that realization brought tears to her eyes. Not bitter, but clean and necessary, like the rain that comes after a season of drought. They traced cooling lines down her cheeks as she remembered, for just a moment, all the nights she'd spent years ago dreaming of this day. Back then, she'd imagined it would feel like standing atop a mountain, arms raised, the crowd below bearing witness to her vindication. And yet, tonight, and in the quiet that followed, it wasn't about what others saw. It was about what she could finally see in herself. Forgiveness, too, arrived softly and in fragments. Earlier, Olivia had watched Grace linger by the club doors, shoulders slumped, her eyes dark with confusion and something like regret. For so many years, Olivia had believed that the only way to heal her wounds was to see Grace punished, to revel in a reversal of fortune. But the real balm had emerged not from Grace's downfall, but from the slow, mutual acknowledgement of their shared humanity. The way insecurity and fear had shaped both their lives, though in different directions. She thought back to their brief exchange, when Grace admitted her own secret fear of invisibility. For a moment, the girl who'd tormented Olivia was just another soul adrift, longing to be seen, chosen, loved. Forgiving Grace didn't mean that Olivia excused her cruelty. It meant she recognized the brokenness in both of them and chose grace over bitterness, if only to finally be done with carrying the weight. As Olivia stood alone in the night, voices from the reunion drifted out in memory. Amanda's gentle praise, Kyle's humble apology. Each one was a layer stripped away from her old pain. The classmates who had once turned a blind eye refused to intervene or joined in Grace's chorus of mockery were now simply people, some regretful, some changed, almost all of them searching for the same thing Olivia was: release from the hold of the past. And release, Olivia found, is not about forgetting. She knew her scars, the insults, the hypercritical glances, every whispered joke and cruel exclusion would never truly fade. But they had changed, from marks of shame to symbols of survival, reminders that sensitivity and ambition were not weaknesses to be purged, but the very traits that fuel growth and beauty. She wondered, perhaps for the first time, if she could actually be grateful for the pain, because it had forced her to define herself. Without those struggles, would she have pushed herself so relentlessly? Would she have learned to give herself the love she'd once begged from others? The world outside Willow Springs awaited her return, yet Olivia felt no urge to rush back to the armor of city life. She wanted instead to linger in this new feeling, a kind of inner quiet, and taste what it was to be unburdened. She wandered the empty sidewalk, letting the glow of her hometown's lights illuminate her path, reflecting on the girl she had been, idealistic, raw, desperate to find her place. She remembered that pain, but now with the wisdom to see beyond it. When she finally returned to her rental car, she caught her reflection in the window. A face, older, yes, but softer, and eyes that gleamed with something like hope. For the first time, Olivia greeted her own reflection with genuine kindness. "You did it," she told herself, not out loud, but with the certainty of someone who knows a door has closed for good. Before leaving, she took one last stroll down Main Street, passing familiar landmarks. The marquee on the old movie theater flickered with upcoming showtimes. The diner windows glowed with the promise of tomorrow's breakfast rush, and the air shimmered with scents of grass and memory. She paused in front of Willow Springs High School, the building that had once contained her greatest misery and triumphs. Tonight, it was silent and ordinary, just bricks and glass, perfectly unremarkable. She pressed her hand to the fence, whispering a silent goodbye. No ceremony, no need to mark the moment for anyone but herself. By the time Olivia drove out of Willow Springs, dawn brushed the horizon with a watercolor of pink and blue. The road unwound before her, empty and promising, carrying her toward a future without the shackles of old stories. Freedom, she knew, meant being able to move forward, and forgiveness meant embracing the complicated, wounded, but ever resilient self she had become. She returned to New York, changed, but not erased, her history now stitched into every step she took. She promised herself to remember this. Power did not come from domination or revenge, but from being able to stand, open and unafraid, in her own truth. If ever she doubted, if the old wounds ached or the echoes of small-town ridicule tried to creep in, she would recall the night she stood beneath Texas stars and chose to live, finally and fully, on her own terms. In the end, freedom and forgiveness were not destinations or gifts, but the slow, steady work of hearts willing to witness, not just each other's pain, but each other's growth. For Olivia Carter, that was the truest homecoming of all.